Coming up this morning, we talk tasers, set them to stun. Over 100 more police on the streets of Cambridgeshire are set to stun. Is it too much? Is it effectively arming the police? Is it a necessary evil, though? Police, do they need this protection? Your thoughts this morning, 08459 25 2000, 81333 on text. Or should we go the whole hog and just put a gun in their holster? At what age should kids be given computers? New research out today says our average child is surfing the web at age 3 in Cambridgeshire. Plus, we've got the Tories' big ideas for the county. We're off for a little walk to Palace. Later on, we'll be talking manga. And we're going for full European integration this morning with your experiences of the things that work in Europe that we don't have here. This after the shock news that Dutch roundabouts could be coming to a town and city near you soon.
Text BBC Radio Cambridgeshire on 81333. Start your message with the word CAN.
I've teased you long enough. If you don't know what a Dutch roundabout is, it's a roundabout that gives cyclists priority and means they're in the line of sight of drivers when vehicles exit the roundabout. You could say it abdicates priority to the cyclist. Thank you, producer Ben, for that line. It's 7 minutes past 7 on your bigger breakfast show this morning. Now let's talk taser. Cambridgeshire Police are expanding the number of officers trained to use taser weapons. 55 specialist firearms officers currently use the taser, which emits an electric shock to temporarily stun and incapacitate offenders. Now, a further 120 officers, many who work in local policing, will be trained to use the taser. Richard Taylor is a Cambridge-based blogger and an anti-taser activist. Morning, Richard.
Good morning, Paul.
What's wrong with keeping our policemen safe as they go about their duty?
Well, I've got no problem at all with proportional policing. Like, if I go to an airport, go to Heathrow or some of the mainline police stations in London, you see armed police walking around. So I've got no problem with police being armed in proportion to the threat that they and the public face, or where the police decide that it's appropriate to have some sort of show of force for deterrence reasons. But there's no argument along those lines for being put forward by the police today for arming neighbourhood police in Cambridgeshire and response officers with taser weapons.
Do you see it as effectively arming the police in Cambridgeshire?
Well, I'm certainly concerned that we're going along that road. We're moving away from having policing by consent towards policing by force. So, and I'm very concerned about how that's going to affect the relationship between the police and the public, and how it might actually make policing in Cambridgeshire much harder to do. Because I think if you're going to go down the road of policing by force, then perhaps our current thin blue line would not be sufficient to cope with that.
Well, Paul Davis is with us as well. He's a spokesperson on firearms for the Police Federation and a Cambridgeshire police officer. Morning, Paul.
Good morning, good morning.
Why do so many officers in Cambridgeshire need a taser?
I wouldn't say it's so many. I think what the force have done is look at it in terms of their strategic threat and risk assessment and said, actually, 55 isn't enough. We cover a large geographical area. Our officers face a risk on a daily basis from members of the public. The types of incident officers are going to, and I think they've looked at that in the round and said, I think we need more tasers to assist our officers.
Yeah, and some officers, I hear, are now having to go out on their own, possibly. Is that part of the problem here?
Well, I think with reduced resources in terms of cuts being made in policing, and the inevitability of that is more officers may find themselves working single-crewed. That has an impact on that officer going out doing their daily business, and it has to be right that we have to take that into account when we're equipping those officers to go out on the streets.
Yeah, and so safety of the officers is paramount, but it is a step away, isn't it, from arming the police?
I don't think so. I think it's another menu of option for the officers. It enables them to deal with members of the public. In terms of, let's look at taser. It's a less lethal option for dealing with those individuals that don't want to come peacefully.
There you go, Richard. It's a much easier option.
Well, I think one of the things that was said there is that perhaps this is about cuts and changes to the police force, and I think that's probably right. Like, our armed policing has now merged with neighbouring forces, so the armed policing units might well be further away. Now, I'd like to see TASER only with those units, but they need to be easily accessible. And I'd also ask, who's given the police the authority to do this? Where's the political leadership? The Home Secretary hasn't said that she wants to see more. The current Home Secretary hasn't said she wants to see more policing armed with tasers, and we haven't heard anything from our Police and Crime Commissioner on this. Our Police and Crime Commissioner, Graham Bright, has just washed his hands of the issue, saying it's operational. But I very strongly disagree with that. This is a strategic change for policing. It really changes the face of policing and the feel of policing, and I think it's absolutely scandalous that our Police and Crime Commissioner hasn't personally taken the decision on this, and he isn't defending it this morning.
Paul, who's made the decision?
I think it's quite right. Operational decisions are made by the chief officer of that particular force area. It's quite right that there shouldn't be any political interference with an operational policing decision.
Yeah. When is a taser deployed? What's the reason for it? When would it come out?
Serious threat to a member of the public or a police officer.
Yeah, and that has obviously happened because you feel the need to arm another 100.
Well, we've had another, since 2011-12, we've had over 130 officers in Cambridgeshire that have been subjected to an assault or a sort of what we call as near miss in the workplace. That's not acceptable. And if TASER enables them to give them the opportunity to deal with a member of the public, it creates distance between themselves and the individual to protect themselves and the member of the public, then that has to be right.
And what happens when you launch the taser? How do they physically work?
It affects the central nervous system. People always talk about the 50,000 volts. Look, it's about the amps, and the amps are really, 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 really low. It's 0 point something, but it affects the central nervous system, and it basically disables the individual.
Right, and but in some cases it does cause problems, doesn't it?
Well, it's inevitable that aftercare is one of those things, and officers have to react to whatever circumstances there are in dealing with that individual.
Yeah, but I suppose if it incapacitates a criminal and keeps the public and police safe, then surely, Richard, that's worth it, isn't it?
Well, the Cambridgeshire Police have said this morning that tasers don't cause injuries, but when the barbs are fired into you, then that does cause an injury in itself. And then when you lose all voluntary control over your muscles, you can't control how you fall down, how you might hurt yourself when that happens. And there are also questions about how taser affects people who may be ill or on drugs, and police officers aren't going to know all the details about the person before they fire the taser at them. Well, of course, I want the public and the police to be safe, but that's behind my argument as well. I want only the officers who are very well trained and experienced, the specialised firearms units, using these weapons. And the reason I want them to see that is so that is to keep the public safe.
Yeah, what would you suggest, if not tasers then? How do we keep the public safe? How do we keep police officers who might have to work on their own in the future? How do we keep them safe in rural areas?
Well, we focus on the British tradition of policing by consent, and we keep a good relationship between the police and the public. So the police and the public are working together, and then where necessary, where there are areas of high violent crime, which no one is suggesting we've actually got in some of these areas, in like the neighbourhoods of Cambridge, where we're now going to see these taser officers deployed, then you do put in the appropriate resources where they're necessary, but we're not seeing that kind of risk and threat assessment as the argument the police are using. Essentially, the police have got all these tasers in the cupboard, and they've decided to hand them out to officers.
Is that the case, Paul?
Well, I think Richard's made a good point there. They're in a cupboard, not being used. But also, I'll put this to Richard. When was the last time he faced a person in anger?
Well, I haven't, but I think that this is a question for society as a whole. It's not just a question for the police. Now, the police input is very valuable, but we've all got to decide how we want our country policed and to what degree we want to see our police force armed.
What's it like going up against somebody on your own, Paul, Without
it's
a
not
taser.
very nice.
Yeah.
It's not very nice. At the end of the day, we all do a very, very difficult job protecting the public on a daily basis. You know, I've been out of the operational field for about 12 years now, and I still continue to see the stories of where our officers are being injured. There was an example yesterday in Manchester, 2 officers stabbed by an individual. Look at the incident outside Buckingham Palace. They used a taser to stop somebody waving knives about where there were members of the public at risk. It has to be right that officers are given the right equipment to go out and deal with the ills of society.
Paul, thank you for coming on this morning. Paul Davis, spokesperson on firearms for the Police Federation and a Cambridgeshire police officer, and Richard Taylor, a local blogger and anti-taser activist. Where do you stand on it? 08459 25 2000. Should we give police every weapon we can in order to protect themselves and the public, or are there some lines we should never cross? 08459 25 2000. We did invite Cambridgeshire Police Chief Constable Simon Parr on the show to speak to us this morning. He declined our request due to not knowing enough about the issue. We also invited the Police and Crime Commissioner, Sir Graham Bright, or his deputy, onto the show, but he's at a conference and not able to speak to us either. The lead officer on tasers at Cambridgeshire Police is on Radio Cambridgeshire later this afternoon. What do you think?
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.